But what message do you have for Australians who are concerned about this ISIS bride cohort, given charges continue to be laid against them?
I would firstly reiterate what the Prime Minister has said. There are consequences for people's actions, and that is the case, as we have seen, where there are a number of Australian citizens who have been charged with very serious offences. It is also the case that the Australian Government is not providing assistance in any form of repatriation of these people. But my key message to Australians is that our law enforcement agencies, our security agencies are the best in the world. They continue to monitor these individuals, and where it is necessary to bring proceedings against them, that will happen.
Viewers, the no assistance claim by Michelle Rowland MP and the Public Trust Fracture, a behavioural political analysis. I'm Dr. J.W. Ayub, theologist since 1994. Like and subscribe to help the channel, comment to educate me, and share to help somebody else. Michelle Rowland MP maintains that the government did not assist the return of the ISIS brides. And legally that statement may survive under a narrow technical definition. But millions of Australians are not processing this issue technically. They're processing it morally, psychologically, nationally. Because the listener is not asking who physically purchased the airline ticket. The listener's asking, did the Australian government help make these returns possible? Yes or no? And that's where the fracture begins. The core thesis of this issue is the issue is no longer simply whether the government can defend its wording. The issue is whether the wording itself was constructed to psychologically distance the government from the emotional consequences of what the public believes occurred. That's the integrity problem. Because once citizens feel governments are narrowing definitions rather than speaking plainly, truth begins collapsing radically and rapidly. Point number 1. Technical truth versus public meaning. This is where political language becomes dangerous. A government can speak in technically defensive language while still leaving the public with a fundamentally different understanding. And that is what listeners are reacting to. Because most Australians hear, "we did not assist," and naturally interpret that as no involvement, no enabling, no facilitation, no operational preparation, no meaningful participation. But reporting strongly suggests travel documentation processes occurred, agency coordination occurred, security preparation occurred, identity verification occurred, reception frameworks existed, authorities anticipated the return operationally. So the listener begins asking, if all of that happened, how is that not assistance? And that's the trust fracture. Point number 2. The listener feels the distance. This is where the public emotionally enters the story because many Australians increasingly feel governments speak downward to citizens, language is managed carefully, moral responsibilities diluted administratively, and difficult truths are softened through technical phrasing. And once that perception forms, every government statement begins feeling filtered, engineered, legally optimised. The citizen no longer hears honesty. The citizen hears liability management. That psychologically shifts and causes a devastating shift for democratic trust. Point number 3, the contradiction explodes publicly. Then came the father's public gratitude. On the Ben Fordham show, he found this audio. He thanked the Albanese Government for bringing his daughter home, one way or another, however you want to interpret it. And that single moment intensified everything, because now the public sees the government minimising involvement while simultaneously the family publicly acknowledging involvement. And that contradiction creates emotional instability for listeners. The citizen begins asking, who exactly is telling the truth here? And once citizens begin questioning the integrity of the language itself, the political damage becomes far larger than the original operational issue. Point number 4, moral consent and national authority. The deeper issue underneath this entire debate is consent. Many Australians feel they were not meaningfully consulted, they were not morally prepared, they were not spoken to transparently about decisions carrying long-term national consequences, and instead they increasingly feel the government made the decision, operationally managed the return, softened the language afterward, then expected emotional compliance from the population. And that's where authority begins feeling psychologically coercive rather than representative. Point number 5, why this story resonates. This story resonates because it activates a wider national fear that governments increasingly manage perception instead of speaking plainly. Not only on this issue, but across security, immigration, extremism, radicalism, social cohesion, public trust, national identity itself, and listeners are beginning to feel exhausted by language that appears carefully engineered to reduce accountability exposure while preserving political flexibility. So in closing, viewers, the public's no longer debating whether a minister's sentence can survive technical scrutiny. What they say can survive technical scrutiny. The public's asking something much more serious. Did the government tell Australians the full moral reality of its involvement with the ISIS brides, or merely the narrowest defensible version of it? And that's the integrity crisis now forming beneath and underneath this story, because once citizens stop trusting the language of authority itself, democratic cohesion begins weakening from the inside. The government does not lose trust only by lying. It loses trust when citizens begin believing official language has been engineered to avoid carrying the full emotional and moral weight of the truth. I'm Dr. JWA, theologist since 1994. Like and subscribe to help the channel, comment to educate me, and share to help somebody else.